history. Spooky episode. I'm Emileigh, and of course, as always, I'm joined by Morgan.
And I'm a ghost.
Oh, no! I'm just kidding. You cannot leave me here.
I will not.
Okay, thanks. So, how's your October going?
It's good. I actually wanted to tell the listeners, I just posted a TikTok about it. I got to go to Hot Springs, Arkansas. When is this coming out? 2 weeks ago. With some friends of mine, and it was so cool. I had never heard of Hot Springs before. They were like, want to come to Hot Springs with us? Yeah. And I was like, sure. I had no idea what to expect. So as you can imagine, there's hot springs there. There's like 47 natural springs like all over the area. And apparently in like the 1920s-ish, it was a gangster paradise. Like all of the gangsters came into town for like trips and vacations. I know, right? I know. And it's hot springs. Like Al Capone had like the 4th floor of the Arlington Hotel, and like there was like secret tunnels and all over the city. And
that is so cool.
There were so many like they all came to the bathhouses. There was like casinos and brothels everywhere. Like, and they came to vacation. Like they didn't do crime. I mean, they did do crime because there was like gambling and, sex work and stuff like that. But they didn't do the crimes. They didn't rob anyone while they were there.
Right.
Like literally the police force like ran everything. Like the sheriff's department ran the casinos, and then the police ran like the brothels. Like it was that kind of city.
Who would have thought that a little town in Arkansas, not like a beach town or anything like that, that is crazy.
It's so cool. We definitely are going to be doing a bonus episode on Hot Springs because there's so much history. It won't be coming out till probably January, but definitely be on the lookout for that if you're a Patreon subscriber.
Yeah. And also, don't forget, in the month of October, you get a free extra sticker for signing up in October. So you'll get 3 stickers this month. And I made them all myself. So
they're so cute, and they are a Patreon exclusive. The only way you can get them is if you are a subscriber. So please join our Patreon, and you get our bonus episodes and our 2 main stickers and this extra special bonus one.
Yeah, and they're limited run. So we're only going to make these every year. They're going to be different every year. So if you want your sticker, get it. I've been throwing out the idea of maybe t-shirts next year.
Yes, let's do t-shirts. I want a t-shirt so bad.
Yeah. I want a t-shirt too. I want, I want us to look professional next year when we do our bonus. So like a podcast, like paranormal investigator t-shirt.
Yes.
I'm here for it. So if y'all want one of those too, either come with us or sign up for a Patreon. All right. Well, I think we've lingered enough.
Okay.
We're going to get into a heavy topic today, Morgan.
Yeah.
And we do have a skit today, so let's get into it. And I'll try not to cry.
If it happens, it happens, and we'll just roll with it.
I just want y'all to know, this topic was so distressing for the past 2 nights. I've hardly slept. And last night, I literally this sounds so pathetic. I cuddled with the husband, and I was just like, it's so bad. I'm going to try to keep it light, though.
Okay.
Into the skit. It's April 11th in Illinois, and the newlyweds, Sarah and Jay Fosdick, are talking about the trip they are about to undertake. Jay, I'm just so glad you decided to come with us. California is going to be wonderful.
Sarah, darling, I would follow you to the ends of the earth. Where you go, I go.
Even on a journey over 1,000 miles?
Even then.
Do you think it'll be hard?
How hard could it be by your side? We can do anything, including making it to California.
The next morning, they wake up, finish loading their wagon, and follow Sarah's family out onto the wagon trail, specifically the Oregon Trail, leaving Illinois and everything they know behind them. God, even the skid almost got me, guys.
I literally saw your face. I was like, she's already about to cry.
Because, guys, I know the fates of all these people. It's such a heavy burden. Okay, listen. First off, before we get into this, if y'all haven't figured it out by now, we are talking about the Donner Party. And if you don't know about it, you're going to learn today.
Buckle up.
And I don't know if I should thank or maybe be very angry at Beth, because back in February for Galentine's, I know we've kind of hinted around, but she sent me this book called The Indifferent Stars Above, the harrowing saga of a Donner Party bride. So this book specifically follows Sarah Fosdick, or Sarah Graves was her maiden name, and her family, because they were a part of the Donner family, but it kind of honed in on her perspective, just as kind of like, I guess, it talks about the whole thing. It tells you the entire story in great detail, even when I was having a really hard time with other sources. They would go all the way up until, a big spoiler, they get stuck, and then they skip a couple months because they don't want to talk about what actually happened. Mm-hmm. We're not skipping it. This book, step by step, tells you exactly what happened. So a lot of after they get stuck is going to come from this book. A lot of before that's going to come from this book and other sources as well, because it's rough. And I understand why other sources wouldn't want to really delve into what happened. Yeah. But following her story gives us a really good perspective, because the way the author is Daniel James Brown, the way he wrote this book, you really feel like you're in where they're at this point. So we're going to go all the way from the time they leave, how the Donner Party came to be, because unlike what a lot of people think, they didn't just start out as this group and then make it. Mm-hmm. To ending as this group. So we get to look at how it formed, their journey, who the families were, and what befell them. So Beth, thanks for the tears. So let's get into it. Morgan, you're going to want to follow the map, guys. If you can pull up a map. I did not Google all these locations that they're going to be at, but I do highly suggest, if you are not driving, if you are in a safe place, as we talk about these places, take a gander and look them up. Look at the terrain that they're at. So, first things first, why in the actual hell would you want to go to California from Illinois in 1846? So, for reference, Lewis and Clark set out in 1804. That was only 42 years ago that they just discovered all this stuff.
Like the whole rest of the country.
Yeah. And if you want to hear about that, go back and listen. But anyway.
Yeah, we have a Lewis and Clark well, you have 2 Lewis and Clark episodes.
We have 2. So. Yeah. So the Oregon Trail was used for fur trading up until the early 1840s, and then it became fur trading and people moving out west. And what's really interesting is that the California Gold Rush didn't actually start until 1848. So they were 2 years earlier than the Gold Rush. So what is making them move out there? Well, in 1837, there was a really bad depression that was caused by the railroad systems. Basically, I'm going to do this off my memory because it says go to page 17. I don't want to. In essence, the railroad coming across everywhere in the what is now the United States, it wasn't back then, was making industries and companies buy land and pretty much claim that they're cities, and then they're getting trains to go to these phantom cities, and people were just losing money hand over fist because it was almost like a panic. So then there was a depression that pretty much rivaled like what we consider our Great Depression. There was also a man named John Sutter, and he was a Swiss immigrant, and he arrived in California in 1839. And he had big plans to build up the Sacramento Valley. And his first form of business was to build Fort Sutter, which he did. And his second, he wanted to build a colony called New Helvetia and bring in tons of people. So he's really trying to build an establishment here. And as soon as, the 1840s, there was a St. Louis newspaper that had been publishing all these amazing descriptions about what was then called Alta California, and it was then a Mexican territory. And between all of this, the word's getting out that California is like a really cool place to be. People are trying to build it up. That there were some Americans already living in California. They were trying to do like this whole revolution thing. So then they'd be like independent from Mexico. We're not getting into all that. Just know that there was word that California is going to be its own thing soon and not part of Mexican territory. And they're really trying to develop these areas. So enter a man named Langsford Warren Hastings.
What a name.
And, well, yeah, he's also a character. And he, spoiler alert, we're all going to hate him by the end of this. So.
Oh, great.
He was, quote, tall, dashing, and energetic. So he's a big outgoing guy. And he was also a lawyer from Mount Vernon, Ohio. And he would travel through the countryside wearing buckskin suits trimmed with fur. And he traveled through Oregon and California between 1842 and 1843. And his goal was to size up potential American settlements. And he wanted to build a reputation and probably build a political career on these new lands that are about to be independent. So, he published a book in 1845 called The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California in Cincinnati. And the book spread like wildfire. The book painted California and Oregon as basically paradise. And the people who lived there were basically, and I hate this so much, quote, savages that could be overthrown easily. So they're like, come on over. We'll just take over this land, this paradise, and it can be ours. The superior white. Anyway. So Hastings went to a little place called Fort Sutter. And he started talking to Sutter about all these thousands of people that were coming to California thanks to his little book. And him and Sutter lay out plans for a town called Suttersville. And in return for Hastings' help, Sutter gave him a huge home, a general store, and the rights to a lot of land in town that could be sold to these people. So, I mean, Hastings has a big, stake in people coming and settling in Suttersville. There was one big problem, though. In his book, he mentioned a shortcut that would later be called Hasting's Cutoff. The only problem is that not once in his fucking travels did he ever step foot on that cutoff. He looked at it on a map and decided very flippantly to just, I think this would be a better route to go.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Now, I will say, he decided that that was a problem, and that on April 11th of 1846, as we will soon know, a lot of the Donner Party was leaving that week as well, from Illinois. He left California, and he made his way to the cutoff, went to Fort Bridger. I'm kind of jumping a little bit. Just know that he's like going to go up and around in Fort Bridger because he decided he is going to take his own cutoff and to make sure that it's possible, right?
Right, right.
So, whatever. I have no nice words about this guy. So,
was he able to like get through the pass, or is that something you're going to talk about later?
We're going to talk about it. But I don't think he came the pass the way in, but he would go around up the normal Oregon route down to Fort Bridger and then we'll get into it. So let's talk about who is in the Donner Party. Again, I wish I could regale you for hours about how they all ended up together. This group of people that I'm about to talk about is who will later be known as the Donner Party. I'm kind of skipping ahead to go back because there's a lot of going back and forth, and I want you to be at least familiar with the names before we start logistically moving. So,
right.
Of course, the Donners. In the Donners, there were 19 people in their party. There were the Donner brothers, George and Jacob. They were elderly farmers. I mean, George was 60 and then Jacob was 56. They had no reason to go to California other than I guess they just wanted to.
They just wanted to.
Because California sounded lovely, doesn't it?
It does.
All these books. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So George brought his third wife, Tamzine, who was 45, and their 3 children, Frances, 6, Georgia, 4, and Eliza, 3. And then George's 2 daughters from a previous marriage, Elitha Kumi, 14, and Liana. I'm probably going to go with Liana. I'll pick that.
Okay.
I don't know how it's pronounced. We've got Jacob Donner, who was 56, his wife Elizabeth, 45. They brought their 5 children, George, 9, Mary, 7, Isaac, 5, Samuel, 4, Lewis, 3, and then Mrs. Donner, Elizabeth's children from a previous marriage, Solomon Hook and William Hook, who were 14 and 12. Y'all, there's a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So each of the Donner brothers had 3 wagons. And they brought 2 teamsters who were just pretty much employees to help them. Noah James, 20, and Samuel Shoemaker, 25. And also traveling with the Donners was a friend named John Denton, who was 28 and from Sheffield, England.
Wow.
Then we've got the Reed family. I know, these are like, when I think of the Donners, I think like 20 people max. Like 87 or something like that.
That's
I
crazy.
Didn't add them all up. Yeah. So we've got the Reed family. We've got James Fraser Reed, 46, his wife Margaret Reed, 32. Their 3 children, Martha, or also called Patty, we'll call her Patty, James Jr., and Thomas. Patty was 8, James was 5, Thomas was 3. So also part of the Reed family was Mrs. Reed's daughter from another marriage, Virginia Blackstow Reed. And then Mrs. Reed's mother, Sarah Keyes, who was 75. Virginia was 13.
Okay.
They also
I'm just going to go ahead and say, like, I'm not going to be able to remember all
No,
these people.
you're not. That's why I'm saying, like, I just want you to be familiar. Don't worry about trying to memorize all of this.
Yeah.
And then they had 5 employees, a servant, Eliza, who was 25, her half-brother, Bayless, 24, Milt Elliott, 28, Walter Heron, 25, and James Smith, 25. There was also Hiram Miller, who was an employee as well. They had super fancy wagons. And
okay.
They were...
The Reed family did?
Yeah, the Reed family did. They were very well off. They literally, like, there was a whole 2 paragraphs just describing, like, their wagons, and that they were almost like coaches. They were, like, bougie.
I do have a question about the book.
Okay.
Were the accounts from, like, the descriptions of the wagons and stuff and what happened, are these, like, taken from journals that were collected, or... Okay.
Yep, they were taken from journals and other accounts from survivors and things like that. Now, he did say in his epilogue, did he embellish on how the grasses felt as they walked through, all that? Yes. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it's
what happened.
What happened from survivor accounts.
Okay.
So the Breen family was only 9 of them. Patrick Breen, 51, Margaret, Peggy, 40, and their 7 children, John, 14, Edward, 13, Patrick Jr., 11, Simon, 9, Peter, 7, James, 5, and Isabella, 1.
One girl.
Yes.
From all those boys.
And she's the baby. So the Eddy family, William Eddy was 28. He and his wife, Eleanor, 25, and their 2 children, James, 3, and Margaret, 5. They had 1 wagon. The Murphy family was also a large one, 13. Lavinia Murphy was 50, and she was a widow. She was the only, I guess, single, as at the beginning of the trip, she was the only single woman with children traveling. So she decided to take this on after her husband died. So, like, applaud to her for doing that undertaking. And she traveled with her children. 5 of them were young. It was Landrum, 15, Mary, 13, Lemuel, 12, William, 11, and Simon, 10. Her 2 eldest daughters, Sarah, 23, and Harriet, 21, were both married, both to Williams.
Okay.
So we've got William Foster, 28, was married to Sarah. They had a 4-year-old son named George. And then Harriet was married to William Pike, 25. They had 2 children, Naomi, 3, and Catherine, 1. All 13 of those had 2 wagons.
That's a lot of people in just 2 wagons.
Yep. We've got Louis Keysburg, 32, his wife Philippine, 23, and they had a 3-year-old daughter named Ada, and their son, Louis Jr., was born on the trail.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. They had 2 wagons, and one was handled by a teamster named Charles Berger, and also traveling with the Keysburgs, we will see this in the future, is a man named Belgian Hardcoop. I swear we're almost done. We've got a man named Wolfinger. I never caught his first name. I don't think anybody knows. But he was German. He was 26, and his wife Doris was 19. And she barely spoke any English. And we've got 2 partners, Augustus Spitzer and Joseph Reinhardt, who were both about 30, traveling with them. We've got the McCutcheon family, William McCutcheon and Amanda McCutcheon, both 30, and their 1-year-old daughter, Harriet. And if you guys haven't noticed, we've got a lot of repeating names. Most of the time, I'm going to go by last names.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot. And then we've got the Graves family, who is the family Sarah's a part of. We've got Franklin Graves, 57, Elizabeth, 47, and their 9 children. The eldest daughter, Sarah, had just gotten married to Jay Fosdick, 22 and 23 respectively, like the week they left. And the children were Mary, 20, William, 18, Eleanor, 15, Lavina, 13, Nancy, 9, Jonathan, 7, Franklin Jr., 5, and Elizabeth, 1. They had 3 wagons and a teamster named John Snyder, 25. We've got Charles Stanton, 35. He was just kind of alone and was hanging out. I think he just kind of worked with the Donners. He just jumped in there one day.
Okay.
And then we've got Luke Holleran, who we'll see in the future, who is 25. A guy named Antonio, 23. He was a shepherd from New Mexico. He would later join. And then a guy named John Baptiste Trudeau, who was 18, who would later join. Okay. 10 minutes of talking about who they were.
I mean, it was 80 people, so.
Yeah. And I know y'all are not going to remember, but I'll remind you. Don't worry.
Yeah, so, and honestly, like, with this kind of incident, I do think it's important that we know the names of everyone that was involved.
Yeah. I know y'all can't see it, but Morgan, I have this paper, 2-sided, and a system of, like, who's doing what and when and how. Okay.
That looks like my cheat sheet when I was going over the Jacobite. It's like, all right, this person was related to this person, and they were descended from this person, and this person was also,
Yep. Yeah, I literally was, like, circling things, and I have numbers everywhere, and it's like anybody would look at it and be like, she's lost her mind. So...
Is this a magic spell?
It is.
Or alchemy that you're doing?
Alchemy. Both. Magic alchemy. So, April 1846. The party set off. They set out about a couple days from each other. The Donner and the Reeds set out from Springfield, Illinois. The Graves left Marshall County, Illinois. I think within a day from each other. All the other families, honestly, hell if I know. Just... We're going here. Okay, so fast forward to Independence, Missouri. This is pretty much the end of the beginning of the Oregon Trail as we know it. Everything east is American territory. Not far past Independence, you're getting into not no man's land, but not American territory.
Right.
So May the 10th, I'm going to pretty much go between the Donner and the Reeds, and then they've got a lot of the rest of the families, and then we've got the Graves, who are kind of trailing behind a little bit. So, May the 10th, the Donner and the Reeds family stop in Independence, Missouri for 2 days. And they made their final arrangements, set out on May the 12th, and on May the 19th, they intercepted and joined the Colonel William H. Russell party. So, if y'all don't know, when you're on the Oregon Trail, you pretty much have a leader or chaos ensues. So, in this case, that was their leader, and it just kind of goes by whoever the leader's name is. So, the Russell Party. And around this time, the Graves were at St. Joe. And people were telling the travelers, like, don't go to Oregon after May. Don't go to California after May. After May the 1st, don't go. Just, it's not worth it. Don't go. And it was already, as we said, May 19th.
Yeah.
And they were like, nah, it'll be fine. So.
I mean, how much land could there be?
So much land.
So much. Most of the country. Most of the continent, yeah.
Yeah. And they'd already blown that date by like 3 weeks, but they're like, do you know what we have that all those other people don't? Hastings Cutoff.
Right, that's short.
Because they were planning on taking the Cutoff because they read the book. Ha! So, Because they didn't know that Hastings had never been on it before.
Right. You take what people say, like, at face value, you know? Like, if they say, like, hey, I discovered this pass and it's a great shortcut, why would you not believe that?
Yeah. Why? Why not? So, on May the 20th, Hastings, at this point, was on his way to Fort Bridger. He was traveling with another very highly regarded traveler, James Clyman. And James Clyman was like, bruh, you should not be going. We do not need to be going your way. It's not happening. They argued about it for days. Hastings wouldn't listen, and they continued on their way towards the cutoff, even though Clyman was like, this is a horrible idea. On May 29th, several new families joined in on the wagon train, and unfortunately, the Sarah Keyes, Miss Reed's mother, passes away.
Oh, man.
So she died very early on. They buried her, and they went on. So we are down to 86 people in the future Donner Party. I am going to be counting down the deaths. I know that seems very morbid, but it's the best way to kind of keep up. Also, there was a lot going on. If I'm off a number or two, don't yell at me, okay?
Okay.
Just know it's at least giving you a roundabout idea of how many people are left. I will, at the very, very end, go over survivors. So you don't have to memorize anything as of right now. So on May 31st, the Reed and Donner Group successfully crossed the Big Blue River and made it into modern day, I'm sure they pronounce it Marysville, Kansas, but it's Maryville to us. So, so in June, on June 17th, we're going to skip some dates. The two groups, the Donner, the Russell Party, as of right now, and the Graves Party were getting closer. And on June 18th, Colonel Russell resigned. And
in the middle of leading them?
Yes. So the group was now led by William M. Boggs. So it's now called the Boggs Company.
Okay.
And on June 25th, the Oregon Spectator reported that Hastings was trying to divert people to California. And they decided to send messengers out to meet immigrants in, quote, in order to prevent their being deceived and led astray by the misrepresentation of L.W. Hastings.
So he's like trying to tell people, like, do not take the Hastings cutoff.
No, the Oregon Spectator is saying, do not listen to what Hastings is saying. Also, Hastings is straight up saying, to get don't go to Oregon in general. Take my cutoff and go to California. Even if you wanted to go to California, there's still a main trail to get there. But not, it's just a whole lot of shit.
Yeah.
And apparently Hastings caught up with like literally a group of people and were like, "Oh, you're wanting to go to Oregon? Oh, you don't want to do that. You want to go to California." And like trying to divert people to Suttersville.
Just so I can understand clearly, Hastings was trying to get people to take his pass to California, but the Oregon Trail people were like, "Don't take his pass."
Yes, there was a normal immigrant route to California already. So not only was he telling people that they should, okay, so if you go to the past Independence Rock around the South Pass, there is a spot that we're going to talk about called the Parting of the Ways. And you can go right and you'll go up to Fort Hall. Once you hit Fort Hall, you can go down and that's the California Trail.
Right. I see that.
And then once you get to Fort Hall, you could go either right again up to Oregon or left to the California Trail. So not only was he telling people, don't go to Oregon because you don't want to settle there. You want to settle in California because he's trying to get people to come into California.
Right.
He's also like, I got this cutoff and you should take it. And Oregon was like, bruh, you can't leave these people alone and let them come to Oregon if they want to come to Oregon.
Yeah.
So, this is around the time that June 25th, again, this is around the time that Hastings arrived at Fort Bridger. And he found it deserted. And then Clyman, that had been with him at the time, was like, this is not a good idea. I am not taking your cutoff with you. And he continued to go east. So he's going up from Fort Bridger, and he's going east via
along the Oregon
route.
Trail.
Along the Oregon Trail, correct. So on June 27th, Clyman arrived at a place called Fort Laramie.
I see. Yep.
Yep. And obviously, he didn't get there in 2 days. It was like, we're roundabouting a little bit. Mm-hmm. But on June 27th, he did arrive at Fort Laramie. And on the same day, the Boggs Company arrived at Fort Laramie. He told Reed and Donner that to, quote, take the regular wagon track and never leave it. It is barely passable to get through if you follow it, and it may be impassable if you don't.
Right. So, like, do not take Hastings Cutoff.
No, do not do it. Follow the regular track. You're already running late. Mm-hmm. Remember, they're already 3 weeks behind.
Right.
So, Reed said the established road was too far out of the way. And Clyman reiterated, like, I just went through that area. Like, I saw what you were going to go through, bro. Don't do it. It's not suitable for wagons. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe they did go. The book wasn't very clear on this. If they went up the back way.
Like through the cutoff. Like the reverse way.
But they didn't have any wagons with them. But anyway, right. I don't know. But they were like, bruh, don't do it. Do not go the cutoff. And the next morning, the Bog Company continued to move west. Clyman went east, looking for more of the stragglers of 1846 so he could warn whoever's over there. Don't do it. Don't do it. July rolls around. July the 3rd. The Graves reach Fort Laramie on July the 3rd, just a few days after the Donner and Reeds. On their way in, they had met a man named Clyman, because he had left. They met him on the way in, where the Graves were warned as well not to take Hastings Cutoff. And they reacted pretty much the same way as the Reeds. I think maybe they were like, I don't know, if it's shorter, I want to take it. But whatever. On July the 5th, the Graves left Fort Laramie without most of the company they had been moving with. I think it was just like the Graves family and maybe like one or two other families left. They left ahead. And
why did everyone else stay behind, did you see?
I think just to rest for just a little bit longer. It takes a long time when you're on the trail. So every time you get to a fort, you want to let the cattle graze. You want to let your oxens rest. And you want to rest yourself, because I think a lot of people have the misconception that if you're on the Oregon Trail, you get to ride in the wagon the whole time. No, these people walked most of the way to save the load from the oxen. And they had other people, because they just had like roaming cattle walking with them as well. So then you had to keep track of the cattle, and you had to, keep track of the horses you have with you and all that other stuff. So to let the animals graze and rest, and you to rest as well. So every time we get to a big point, it's like they stay a few days or what have you. So on July the 11th, the Grays party came across an eastbound traveler who was alone, named Wales B. Bonney. This is the beginning of how much I hate Hastings. Okay, so rumors of a possible murder were kind of swirling around Oregon about this guy right here, and he had just like very quickly and suddenly and recently left Oregon. So like this note was being brought in by a Moidra.
Okay.
So wild. I don't know why I thought that was important, but it was. And he had a note from Hastings that he had encountered Hastings on the Sweetwater River, and Hastings was like, hey, if you're going east, I need you to tell anybody who's on the road that literally the note was addressed to all California immigrants now on the road. And he said pretty much everyone to go to Fort Bridger. He would be waiting for them to guide them to California because he had just explored the new route. So apparently he had been on it.
Okay.
But I was very confused about that part. I was like, you made it sound like he went around, but I guess
went through the back way. Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah, it does. He said he had just explored the new route. And so all these immigrants that had read their book was like, oh my God, Hastings himself is going to be there. We're totally going the cutoff. We're going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward to the Little Sandy River in Wyoming. This is what is known as the parting of the ways. And you go right, you go the normal way, you take a left, you go to Fort Bridger at the cutoff or towards the cutoff. And Fort Bridger is basically just like a tiny little trading post run by Jim Bridger and Louis Vasquez. By this time, I know I had said Fort Bridger was abandoned when Hastings got there. Jim and Louis were there by now.
Okay.
And by July 19th, so remember, they've already been on the road for 3 months already. The Donner Party was officially formed when the Boggs Party went right and went to Fort Hall, and the rest of the party, the Donner Party, went left towards Fort Bridger. Now, pretty much everyone that we talked about, except for the Graves family, because they hadn't caught up yet, and a couple people that we're going to meet at Fort Bridger are included in this. So we're pretty much almost all the way formed now.
Okay.
They elected George Donner as the leader of the group. I think because he was the oldest. I don't know. And so we're looking at Donner, Reed, Breen, Eddy, Murphy, Keysburg, Wolfinger, Spitzer, and Reinhardt families.
Okay.
And then the Graves were on their way. So all the families involved agreed to take the cutoff because they were tired of life on the trail already. And only Tamzine Donner had a problem with the cutoff, saying she saw nothing but folly in the notion of following a man they didn't know on an unproven route. And I feel like we should appreciate and take more consideration into a woman's instincts, because she's like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
We can make it just fine. It's been proven. Let's take the proven route.
And it sounds like that's what the Boggs were doing too. Like, they're like, no, we don't. Unless they weren't even going to California in the first place, if they were going to Oregon. Did you ever see where their final destination was?
Everybody in this party was wanting to go to California anyway.
So, but the Boggs were going to take the traditional route, not the cutoff. And that's why they separated. I believe,
and that's why they separated. They didn't want to take the cutoff. They wanted to take the regular route. And I think some in the Boggs party at the point of splitting would probably go up to Oregon as well. Okay. But all the California bound people in the Boggs party that wanted to take the regular route is no longer with them. Yeah.
Right.
They went on. Yeah. And I wish honestly that they had in this map a line going from like where the parting of the ways and like up to Fort Hall was, but they don't. So sorry about that, guys.
I just assume it's more of like a cut
like
through
little,
between like that dip down. Okay.
Like a bypass, you know?
Yeah.
So, life on the trail is so rough. And I can understand how, if presented with an opportunity of getting off the trail sooner, one might want to take it.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I could do that in good conscience. Like, I don't know what's out there. I would rather take the path well traveled in this situation.
Absolutely.
And they also, like, this book talks a lot about life on the trail and how it was and why and a lot of other things like that. It's very fascinating. I highly suggest it. If you can stomach all these details that I'm literally just not putting in. So,
yeah.
July 28th takes them 9 days to get to Fort Bridger. And on July 28th, the Graves family split from their party, so they're a little bit of ways, at the parting of the ways, and started heading to Fort Bridger on their own. They would arrive, I believe it was August the 3rd.
Okay.
But the Donner Party, the same day that the Graves family split from their party, the Donner Party was arriving in Fort Bridger on July 28th.
Gotcha.
And then on July 31st, the Donner Party left Fort Bridger. And this is officially, they are in the Hastings Cutoff. The Donner Party at Fort Bridger gained the McCutcheons, Luke Halloran, and John Baptiste Trudeau. Okay. Luke Halloran, it was basically just a mercy. He had what they called consumption, tuberculosis.
Yeah.
And he was dying and was alone. And he had actually decided to go to California for his health.
Mm-hmm.
So his other party, he was so sick that they left him at Fort Bridger. Oh, that's
so sad.
Yeah. And John Baptiste Trudeau was the 18-year-old son of a fur hunter or trapper, something like that.
And he's a very French name, so I assumed he was
a
fur hunter, fur trapper.
He's the son of one, and I think his father had died, so he was like, no, I might as well go to California. Hastings, though, was not at Fort Bridger. He had left a few days earlier with another wagon train along his new route. So he was already on the trail. They missed him by a couple days. He left word for the Donner Party to follow and promised to mark the trail for him as they went. So he was going to literally leave notes. Leave a breadcrumb freaking trail for these people.
Okay.
So Jim Bridger and Louis Vasquez had in their possession a letter from someone who had done the trail, and it was left for Reed. He said that the note basically said, it is not fit for wagons. Do not take it. Do not take the shortcut. You're better off going around the other way, eating that few days it took you to get here and just going.
Mm-hmm.
Vasquez did not give him the letter.
Oh my God.
Because Bridger and Vasquez were afraid that if no one took the cutoff, then their fort wouldn't survive because there was no reason for anybody to go down there.
Oh, man.
Because it was so far out of the way. Because the normal split was at Fort Hall. So they didn't give these people this letter from a trusted source for selfish reasons.
That's so devastating. I wonder if they would have listened.
Maybe. I don't know. So August the 1st, just a day after they got onto Hastings Cutoff, Eddie Breen, who was, I believe, 12. Let me confirm that real quick. Yep, he was 13. Was thrown from his horse and broke his leg.
Oh, no.
Like bone sticking out, kind of broke his leg.
Oh, no.
So they had to wait for a day. A doctor came. They almost amputated the leg, but the kid was like, "You are not cutting off my leg." The doctor was paid $5 just for his time, I guess, and then he left. And they set the bone as best as they could, and then put him in the back of a wagon. Yeah. Can you imagine how painful that would be?
No.
Going on this with a broken leg on this janky wagon.
Yeah, it through the Rocky Mountains. Like, no.
Yeah, no. So that set them back a couple days. The next day, so that happened August 1st and 2nd-ish, August 3rd, the Graves did finally make it to Fort Bridger. They were told the exact same lies, because not only did Bridger and Vasquez not give them the letter, read the letter, they were telling them how the pass was perfectly fine, how it was smooth, and you know, you might hit a bump here and there, but like, it's passable. You got it. So they were told the same lies, and they entered Hasting's Cutoff as well. So by August 5th, the Donner Party had reached Weber Canyon. And this is where Hastings claimed there was an easy passage through the Wasatch Mountains. And when they reached the head of the canyon, they found a note from Hastings. So at least he's leaving notes.
Yeah.
And attached to the stick was a note warning them that the route ahead was more difficult than he had thought, and that they should wait and make camp and send a messenger ahead so Hastings could show them a better way around. And they were like, all right. So they set up camp, because to turn around and go back, they would have wasted several days. And James Reed, Charles Stanton, and William Pike volunteered to go, and they set out the next morning. The messengers caught up with Hastings at the south end of the Great Salt Lake.
Okay.
They asked him to make good on his word, come back and show him the better way. And Hastings did come back, but only as far as the peak on the western edge of the mountains, and wouldn't go any further. He literally got to the peak, could see the camp, could see the other way, pointed at it, and was like, go that way. And then he went back to the other group.
I'm getting very angry at this man who lived like 200 years ago.
Yeah. I'm horrified by this guy.
Yeah.
So on August the 10th, it took them 5 days. The messengers returned with the instruction from Hastings to follow the other trail. And the same day, August 10th, the Graves reached the Donners. So this is the final iteration as we know it today. So now when I talk about the Donner Party, the Graves have caught up, and this is it.
They're all
now.
Okay.
They're all accounted for here. So Reed then set out to convince the entire party that Hastings was right and that they should go through the gap instead of turning around and going back to Fort Bridger. He had already named it Reed's Gap. Like, he was very confident that Hastings was right. You're putting a whole lot of faith in this man that you don't know. That
couldn't even come to meet
back.
you.
Yes. Was good. Yeah. Okay. So, unfortunately, and it was basically like a whole chapter of them getting through this gap. We don't have time for that. This other route was so much worse. So much worse. If they had just followed the original, it would have sucked really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like it would have sucked this bad. They literally were having to carve a fresh road through the trees and boulder strewn grounds. And at one point they got so tired of moving giant boulders that there was like a pretty steep hill that they had to like double team the oxen and then one by one pull the wagons up this steep ass hill, and they had to like tie ropes to the oxen so the oxen wouldn't like fall down the hill to help them get up. And they had to do this with like 12 wagons or some shit like that. It was so many. And eventually, on August the 15th, they just couldn't go any further. They set up camp in the Wasatch Mountains, and it would take them 3 days to just cut a new path because they had just set up camp. Like, and then they would clear it out, and then they all like moved at once. It was heart-wrenching to read this, because I think having the knowledge of knowing roughly what happens at the end, it's just the whole time I'm screaming like, no, don't do this, no, don't do that. But I mean, like, hindsight's 2020. We know not to go through there.
Yeah,
but they were very trusting.
This is very heartbreaking.
We haven't even gotten. We're just getting.
We're not even at the bad part yet.
No. So, August 21st, they eventually made it through the gap, and they were looking at the Salt Lake Valley. Now, remember, guys, they set out on like the 10th or 11th. It was the 21st, and they are just now past the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah.
It had taken them 16 days to go 35 miles.
That is ridiculous.
That's like 2 miles a day.
Yeah.
According to Hastings, now all they had to do was go over a 40-mile dry drive across the Salt Desert. Y'all, Google the Salt Deserts of Nevada. Just Google them. They have races there now. I didn't even Google. I just know that.
Yeah.
And then that would be followed by hundreds of miles of like sand hills and an alkali desert. And then they would get to the Sierra Nevada mountains. No big deal, right?
Yeah.
So on August 25th, Tamzine and George were nursing a very quickly ailing Luke Holleran, and he eventually did pass away that night. So now we are down to 85 in the Donner Party, and one still injured. I don't know exactly when his leg healed, so eventually I'll stop saying that, but
yeah.
Remember, one still has a broken leg.
Yeah.
Okay. Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. You know, I said Salt Lake Valley was in Nevada. No, it's in Utah, guys. I said Nevada. Yeah. Ignore me.
It's okay. They're right next to each other.
They're literally neighbors. So, August 31st. 31st. My bad.
All that salt's got you dried out, Emily.
Listen, I'm just thinking about what's about to happen, and I'm drying out like SpongeBob on the sand.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Salt Lake Valley, there's fresh water, there's geese, and there's all sorts of wildlife, and they kind of stayed there for a few days, stocked up as best as they could, and then they were like 40 miles. We fucking got it, right?
They have never seen a desert before.
An assault desert. And Hastings said it was 40 miles. It's more like 80.
Yeah.
It's twice that. So they entered at night, hoping that they would travel at night, because it was getting real freaking hot.
Yeah.
Because it's August in a salt desert, in the Salt Lake Desert. Woo! The last spring that they had come across after entering was just reeking of sulfur. So whatever they had in their kegs would have to be enough for them and their cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And they walked all day and night. And then when the moon went behind the ridge, they continued to walk in the pitch black. And because it's a desert, it's really hot during the day and it's really cold at night. And they're trying to save their oxen and their cattle and their horses. So they're all walking. I mean, mothers carrying children.
Yeah.
Fathers carrying children. Older siblings carrying children. Like, it was rough. And during the day, they were plagued with migraines, and then at night, it was cold and black, and all day without water. They walked for 2 days straight. And eventually, there was a lot of relaying that happened, but eventually, some had to leave their wagons and continue on foot. The Eddy family literally abandoned their wagon. She picked up her baby girl, her 1-year-old daughter. William Eddy picked up the 3-year-old. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the 3 and 5 carried their children and walked the rest of the way. And didn't stop.
So they just left all their supplies behind or just the wagon?
They left the wagon and no, all the supplies pretty much. I think they grabbed maybe a little bit of food and like blankets and stuff. So by Wednesday, 2 days later, around 10 a.m., those walking made it to the springs at the foot of Pilot Hill. And then others began trailing in that day. Those who abandoned their wagons would eventually get fresh water, take them back to the animals and the oxy and get them. So they took a couple days.
Oh, so they left all the animals in the desert too.
They left everything.
Wow.
Yeah. And because literally the oxen were like, I'm done, and just sat down because they all ran out of water.
Mm.
And literally the salt was just pelting their faces, and their lips were cracking, and they couldn't see shit. And the reeds had it worse. They were stuck furthest out, and eventually they had to walk back with all of their kids and all 5 family dogs that they had brought.
Oh.
And then in the dead of night, they couldn't see anything, and the kids were cold. So they literally piled blankets on all the kids. The kids were still cold, so they made the dogs lay on top of the kids for extra warmth. And then they sat, I'm going to cry again, they sat upwind to block the wind from hitting the kids and sat there all night until morning. And then they realized they could actually see, and the Reeds saw, I believe it was the Breen family was not that far, and the Breens took all the kids in and warmed them up and stuff like that. And I mean, they were working together as best as possible, but everybody's kind of on their own, but also kind of working together.
Yeah. It's we'll try to help you the best we can, but we can't help you at our own detriment.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
So unfortunately, overnight, the Teamsters had lost almost all of their cattle.
Oh, wow.
And the Reeds were down to a cow and 1 ox. And they had to abandon most of their things. Because they had multiple wagons. Now they only have a wagon. So, over the next week, they sat at that springs so they could go back and forth and get everybody's stuff out of the desert. But they all made it out. On September the 10th, they woke to snow on the higher reaches of Pilot Peak. And that's starting to get a little sketchy.
Yeah.
Right?
It's once you start, I mean, we talked about it in Lewis and Clark, once you start hitting September, Winter
you need
comes
to
very
get
quick in
somewhere.
the Midwest. Yeah.
Yes. Especially when you know that your route is going to take you through some of the highest peaks in the country.
Yeah.
So they took stock of their supplies and they realized that they were running short. So they took volunteers to get on horseback and go ahead and gather more supplies to meet back with them, do a little relay. Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon volunteered. Again, Charles Stanton is a single 35-year-old man. William McCutcheon is leaving behind a wife and a 1-year-old daughter to go. And they had a letter from Reed promising to pay for any supplies that were given to him. September 11th, the next morning, the rest of them set off, started walking again, and Reed had to stop again and lighten the load. I mean, they are throwing away all of their worldly possessions just on the side of the trail. And I think one of the most heartbreaking things, we've talked about death a few times in this situation or in this story already, that before now, like, all these families would be able to lay their loved ones to rest and then have a place to go visit them. And when someone dies on the trail, you just get buried in a shallow grave and you're like,
yeah,
sorry, love you, I'll never see you again. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's very sad.
So on September the 13th, they camped on the trail. And Reed's diary, Reed had been taking a diary, and that night he called it Mad Woman's Camp. And nobody knows why all the women were mad. They just know that all the women were mad. So
was it mad as in like angry, or mad as in like experiencing psychosis? Like
angry. They were pissed.
Okay.
I don't know what they were mad about, but
oh, I'd be pissed too.
Yeah. I'd be like, you dumbasses, we shouldn't have taken this freaking cutoff.
Yeah.
So, okay. We are still not back on the regular trail yet. So on September 26th, they finally reached the main fork in the Humboldt River and finally got back on the established immigrant road.
Okay.
They had already taken a 125-mile detour following Hastings tracks around the south end of the Ruby Mountains that they later would find out was unnecessary. So, on top of all the bullshit, they went an extra 125 miles when they didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, those who had stayed on the main path made it to this spot in 37 days from the parting of the ways. And that was about average. Mm-hmm. The Donner Party made it there in 68 days. Hastings Cutoff had added a month to an already 3-week late party.
Yeah. And they wouldn't listen to, was it Clyman?
Clyman. Yeah.
When he said, don't do this. And they're like, oh, we will, because it will save us time. And it literally did the opposite.
Listen to the people who know what they're talking about. Don't listen to dude in a fairy tale book. Listen to the guy that just came from there.
And I'm freaking those guys at Fort Bridger that didn't give him that note.
It's sickening, isn't it? All because they're sad. Like, yeah, if people, no one's gonna come to Fort Bridger if no one's making it out of Hastings Cutoff. Like, It doesn't matter. Tell the truth. Put your stock somewhere else. I'm disgusted, honestly.
Yeah.
So now we're on the established trail. Things should be getting easier, right?
No, now they got to get through Nevada.
Yeah, seriously. And guess who knows about the established route? Native Americans. Yeah. And I'm not saying, obviously, that they're horrible people or anything, but there were some tribes that did steal from
Yeah.
The immigrants. It just, it happened.
We talked about it in the Lewis and Clark episode. There were some tribes that would help travelers, and there were some tribes that would steal from travelers. You know.
Yep. And
it's human nature.
Yeah. And there were only, I think, 4 Native Americans or 4 immigrants that were killed by Native tribes like that year. Mm-hmm. And I think it was like 30 the other way around. So, I mean, you know, shit do be happening out there in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So, between September 29th and October 1st, 2 of the Graves oxen and one of their best mares were stolen by the Shoshone tribe. Mm-hmm. On October the 5th, this is so horrible, John Snyder and Milt Elliott began arguing after their wagons became entangled with each other as they went up a sandhill. So they were doing the like double team again. John Snyder thought he could get his wagon up, but then like the oxen got tangled and shit. Milt Elliott, as a reminder, was working for the Reeds. John Snyder was working for the Graves. And Reed and William Eddy had been out hunting, and when they came back, they saw these 2 arguing. Snyder's whipping the bulls to try to get them untangled. A whole lot happens, but Snyder said that Elliott got in his way. Reed was like, it doesn't matter. Please stop hitting the ox like that. Like you're mistreating them. Snyder raised the bullwhip to threaten Reed with it. Reed went over to Snyder, pulled a knife. It's pretty much like road rage is happening right now.
Yeah. I'm sure tensions are high anyway.
Oh, yeah. And so Snyder ended up hitting him with the butt of his whip. And on the second strike, Margaret Reed had rushed over between the men, and she got hit in the head as well on accident because she got between them. Well, Reed was really mad that, like, you just hit my wife. So he got mad and ended up stabbing Snyder in the chest.
Wow.
And it punctured his lung, and it did end up killing him.
Wow.
Unfortunately, Snyder had been very popular. He was young. He was outgoing and funny. And Reed was kind of on everyone's shit list for making them go through the pass when they should have turned around. So they were calling to hang him.
Wow.
And people were like, okay, maybe... No, we're not going to hang him. We're just going to save his wife and children from, watching him hang. We're going to banish him. So he got on his prized horse, and they didn't give him anything, and he left the next day.
Wow.
Later that night, Reed's daughter, Virginia, and Milt Elliott left camp and found him, took him his rifle, his pistol, some ammo, and a few crackers. And that's all they could spare. But that alone would save his life down the road and ultimately pretty much save a lot of other people's lives. The fact that he got banished is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, I didn't find this in the book, but I did find this on another source that Hiram Miller ended up going with him after he got banished, he ended up going with him. So they left.
Okay.
So now the Donner Party is down to 84, with 1 presumably still injured and 1 banished. So on October 7th, everybody is having to walk to spare the animals. I mean, everybody. Oh, also, I forgot to say, don't forget, we've got Charles Stanton and McCutcheon off getting supplies.
Oh, so I was actually wondering if they had gotten back yet or not.
They have not yet. No.
Okay.
We'll bring them back into the loop. So,
okay.
Mrs. Reed and her children were given the wagon that Snyder had been in charge of. I guess the Graves felt bad. And, the Reeds had what was it, 5 kids?
Mm-hmm. Did they ever get any of their wagons back?
4 kids.
Or were they just left out forever?
They were just left out forever.
Wow.
Once you abandon a wagon, it's gone unless you go back and get it. But then who knows? Somebody might have stolen it. It's just sitting there.
I wasn't sure because, like, when they made it to the spring, they were, like, going back out and, like, getting supplies they had left in the desert. So I wasn't sure if they had, like...
Oh, they did. Yeah, they ended up... If it was left in the desert, they did go back and get the wagons and such.
Okay.
But in, like, certain situations, if I say they had to abandon something, they ended up just leaving the wagon on the side of the road. And
yeah.
Off they went. So everyone's having to walk, unless you're like a 1-year-old baby, obviously. That, unfortunately, included the Mr. Hardcoop that they had picked up at Fort Bridger. He was put out of the wagon. He was older and not in great health. And over the next couple of days, he fell behind. And on the second day, some boys driving some cattle saw him sitting under a tree. And that was the last time anyone saw him alive.
Wow.
So the Donner Party is now down to 83. Not sure how the boys doing, but one is still banished. 2 are still getting supplies.
Mm-hmm.
October the 10th, Paiutes run off with all of the Graves horses. All of them. October 11th, the Paiutes ran off with 18 head of cattle that belonged to the Donners and the Wolfingers. October 15th, they killed 21 head of cattle that belonged to the Eddies. Wow. And the Wolfingers team, and only left 1 ox per family.
Wow.
So within a week,
they lost like all their livestock.
All their livestock. That day, Eddie buried whatever they had left, grabbed a 3-pound block of sugar, and him and his wife and his 2 kids took off on foot, carrying their kids. And the Wolfinger was said to have a large amount of money and wanted to bury the body of the wagon in the ground to protect the money so he could come back for it later. No one was willing to help him stay, or no one was willing to stay and help him bury it.
You gotta go.
Reinhardt and Spitzer. Like, we gotta go. Nobody gives a shit about your money. So Reinhardt and Spitzer actually stayed behind, and his wife, Doris, went along with the rest of the group while the 3 men stayed behind and buried it. So now entering the Alkali Desert. So on October 16th, the Eddies caught up with the Breens, who had been a little bit ahead at the hot springs, where they had, camped out for those few days after the 40-mile desert. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They walked all the way through this Alkali Desert, and when they got to the end, they ended up just drinking the sulfur water. It tasted horrible, but it was better than nothing. They filled up their containers, and they walked the rest of the way carrying their children. The rest of the group comes on, and they made it to the Truckee River on October 17th. And they came across another sandhill that they had to, double team. When they got to the other side, of this Alkali River and this sandhill, it was like it opened up to the Truckee River. And they were like, this is the first good water they've had since they left the Great Salt Valley. Wow. So they stayed there for a few days, hunted a little bit.
Yeah.
Literally, William Eddy heard geese nearby. He staggered off the river, or off the desert, put his kid down, grabbed his gun, went out and shot 9 geese. And it was the first food they'd had other than sugar in 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
For that family. And a little bit later, Spitzer and Reinhardt came in off the desert with bad news. Apparently, Wolfinger had been killed by Paiutes and made off with all of his goods. It would later be found out that Spitzer and Reinhardt actually killed Wolfinger.
I saw that
And
coming.
yeah, yeah. They don't know if it was like an argument or like cold blood, but they did take off with his stuff. And that left
Mm-hmm.
Doris Wolfinger a widow who barely spoke English, and she was only 19.
And they had a 1-year-old,
Terrifying.
right?
No,
Or
the Wolfingers didn't have any children.
okay.
It's hard to keep up with.
Yeah.
The McCutcheons had children.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think that's the family of 3 you were thinking of.
I think so.
Yep. So the Donners are down to 82.
Gotcha.
By now, the boy might be able to walk, so I'm going to stop talking about him. 1 banished, 2 still getting supplies. On October the 19th, Stanton returns from Sutter's Fort with the supplies. Notice I said just Stanton because McCutcheon had fallen ill at the fort, and he couldn't return at this time. So they had gone
like all the way to California and back.
And back.
Wow.
Yep. So they made it to Fort Sutter and then went back over the mountains. We're looking not at Lake Tahoe, but in this kind of vicinity is what we're looking at.
Okay.
So they had 7 mules laden with flour, dried beef, other supplies. And with Stanton were 2 young men, Miwok native vaqueros or cowboys. I'm going to call them cowboys. But their names were Louis and Salvador. And they were sent by John Sutter himself to assist the group.
Wait, and I'm so sorry. To go back to McCutcheon, you said he'd fallen ill. Was he still at Sutter's Fort?
He was still at, Fort Sutter.
Okay.
He does show back up later. He gets over the illness, but at this moment, he was too sick to go anywhere.
Okay.
So on his way back up, Stanton had actually run across James Reed, who was alive but very emaciated. I think Stanton gave him a little bit to keep going. Reed does make it into California.
Okay.
So the Donners were up to 83 again after the loss of McCutcheon, but the addition of the 2 cowboys with Reed still banished.
Okay.
So on October 20th, the Donner party came to the final bend in the river and saw the Truckee Meadows and their first glance of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, these mountains were already capped with snow and had black clouds.
Great.
And they stayed in the meadows and allowed for the remaining cattle to graze, let the stragglers catch up before going up. Because there's a meadow and then there's like what's now called Donner Lake. And then you get up into the rough bits of it.
Okay.
So they decided to send another group ahead and get more supplies to bring back just in case there was a delay in weather. They picked the 2 brothers-in-law, William Pike and William Foster. They belong to the Murphy family. That's Sarah and Harriet's husbands.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the gun William Foster was holding accidentally went off and shot William Pike in the back.
Oh, no.
Killing him.
Like while they were out getting supplies or?
Before they even left.
Oh, man.
Like people watched it happen.
Oh, no.
Yep. So, to my knowledge, another party did not go out. I don't know why they didn't.
Maybe they were just grieving and they're like, never mind.
Never mind. Yeah. But William Pike's wife, Harriet, was only 18 years old and they had a 1-year-old daughter.
Oh.
1-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter. So
we have another widow.
Another widow. And there was no other mention of anyone else going for supplies, like I said. So we're down to 82 now with one banished. So on October 29th or 30th, They made their way into Dog Valley with cold rain and slightly spitting snow. Late that day, they camped in the grassy meadow, and they were only 9 to 10 miles away from the California line.
They're so close.
So close. By the next day, there were a few inches of snow on the ground, but they continued on.
Wow.
And you've got to remember, they are tired and hungry, and their shoes are tattered, and they were exhausted just to get around Truckee Lake, and which is Donner Lake now, and to the base of like where they needed to go up to the Sierra Nevada desert mountains. And they made it to the edge of the 1,100-foot cliffs and were absolutely shocked at what they saw. There was like one small notch in the mountains that they were supposed to go, and it already had snow on it, and it looked impassable for wagons.
Yeah.
They tried to make it up, and they quickly lost their way because of the few feet of snow. And apparently that year, it had started snowing a month early.
Oh my gosh.
So not only are they now 7 weeks behind schedule, it started snowing a month early.
Yeah.
The snow was already in September up to the oxen's chests.
Wow. So that's like what? Like probably 4 feet?
4 feet. And by that evening, they had to turn around and go back to the lake's edge. The Breens had found an abandoned shanty or cabin and moved all of them into it for the night. And the rest just got into their wagons for the night. Or, you know, the ones that didn't have wagons got in with it.
Yeah.
They found cover. So the Donners had been in the back of the group, and they were out of sight. No one knew exactly where they were, but in their ascent into Dog Valley, one of their wagons had overturned and temporarily trapped 4-year-old Georgia and 3-year-old Eliza in the wagons.
Oh no.
They turned out they were fine, but they were able to get them out, but the wagon axle had broken, and it had taken them pretty much all day to make a new axle out of a pine tree. And during this incident, George Donner had cut his hand while working on the axle, and it had already started to get infected.
Oh,
because
my gosh.
living conditions on the trail are horrible and dirty and gross. So infections were just, they happened.
Yeah.
So they got word from a messenger from the lake camp that the mountains were impassable, and the Donners began to make preparations at the nearby Adler Creek. I think it was like a quarter of a mile away.
Okay.
Or half a mile away from the main camp. So they felled trees, started making a cabin, and unfortunately the snow was falling so fast, they couldn't build a cabin fast enough. And eventually they had to abandon the idea of a cabin and set up tents as best as they could. But, I mean, you've got a couple feet of snow in a tent. Like, that's not...
Yeah.
Yeah. So, while the Donners were still at Adler's Creek, the group was kind of like out of sorts because their leader is not there anymore.
Right.
So they were like, what do we do? And they were like, well, we could take the mules out, and the mules could lead, and then we could just follow behind the mules. And some decided to leave the wagons, some decided to lighten the load more and take the wagons, and some even decided that they were going to leave the wagons, but bring the oxen and tie their stuff to the oxen. But the oxen weren't used to that kind of load, and they were like rubbing themselves up against trees and trying to get it off of them because they weren't used to that kind of thing, like mules were. And Lewis Keysburg had injured his leg back, I think, in one of the deserts, and he mounted a horse, strapped his leg down, and they were like, we're going to try again. So this time they let the mules lead. Unfortunately, with the snow up to the mules' chests too, they just kept falling like headfirst into the snow. And those who had wagons, the wagon wheels just kept slipping because they're just metal, like, wheels. They're not going to grip anything on ice and snow. They have no traction. And the oxen just couldn't get them pulled along, and they fought like this for hours. And they were like carrying kids and going up, waist deep snow or chest deep snow for some. And Salvador and Lewis had lost the wagon trail in the snow. And then Charles Stanton had one of them go like find it. By the time they found it to find what they were looking for, they came back and the party had ground to a stop. Everyone was too exhausted to go on, and they just sat in the snow, and they even set fire to a tree nearby so people could get warm. And night was coming too. So Stanton said that they should press on, but no one wanted to move. So that night they all just kind of went to sleep on the buffalo hides and did what they could. Had they moved on, had they persevered, I feel like a lot of what's coming up wouldn't happen. But they went to sleep anyway, because how would you know? And they woke up the next day legitimately covered in snow. Like, the book said that they were popping their heads up like gophers. Or, like, because they heard Keseberg screaming. And because he thought he was alone in the mountains. And then they all started popping their heads up, and it was still snowing. By this morning, by the morning they were waking up in the snow, those who had split at the parting of the ways were nestled very comfortably in their new homes in California.
Yeah.
And their options were either to push forward on foot and risk dying of exposure and exhaustion, or go back down the mountain to the lake's edge and camp where the remaining cattle could still graze on what was left, and that would buy them more time. They picked the second option and made their way back down the mountain to the lake's edge, and they made it back by 4 p.m. that night.
Wow.
It would snow for the next 8 days.
Oh my God.
And during that time, they realized they needed to work together, and they still operated individually, but they were kind of tired of each other. So let's take some stock. The Reeds had almost no food. All of her kids and 2 employees. The Murphys and the Eddies were destitute. They had nothing. The Breens had most of the cattle and goods, so they were okay. The Donners still had a lot of their possessions, money, fabric, stuff like that. But money, fabric, and coins are kind of useless.
Right.
In this situation. The men working on with the Donners had even less. And the Graves had lost all of their horses and most of their cattle, but they were tough, outdoorsy people, and they had experience living on the frontier. And then there was Doris Wolfinger, Harriet Pike, Amanda McCutcheon, who didn't have their husbands with them. Yeah. And as a result, they were pretty much just reliant on others for survival. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where I'm leaving you. They're stuck in snow at the top of a mountain 9 miles from the California line.
Oh my gosh.
In November.
Oh, it's November now. Oh my God.
It's November. Yep. How are you feeling, Morgan?
Stressed. And I'm glad you stopped here. But I know, like, our part 2 is just going to be, like, the worst episode ever.
It is. There is going to be a lot of... I did find bits and pieces of heartwarming stuff going through the story where it's like parents doing everything they can to make sure that their children lived. Yeah. And if it's any consolation, a vast majority of the survivors are children because of the sacrifices of their parents. So, like, there are heartwarming things that are to come, but there's also a lot of tragedy, and that's why we waited till October.
Yeah. Because when else can you talk about horrific tragedy other than October?
Yeah, it's fine this month. And I know that there's been a lot of crazy things. I really do suggest y'all read this book because it really goes into great detail that I just couldn't do because it's already been a long time for this one episode. So, whoo-wee. Yeah, I guess we should...
Let's just do socials.
Yeah, let's do socials. This is heavy. Okay. If we haven't scared you off, you can find us on Facebook.
Ill-Equipped History Podcast group and page.
Instagram.
At Ill-Equipped History.
Gmail.
Ill-equippedhistory@gmail.com.
TikTok.
At Ill-Equipped History.
And Patreon.
Patreon.com/Ill-Equipped-History. It is not too late to sign up for a Patreon and get a little sticker.
Yeah, do it.
Actually, you get 3 stickers if you sign up this month.
Yeah, 3 stickers. So, don't take Hastings Cutoff. Actually, fuck don't. Hastings.
Yeah, fuck.
Just screw that
Stephen. Guy. That's the first name, right? Stephen.
Landrum, Warren, Hastings.
Fuck Landrum, Warren, Hastings.
No, Hastings. Just F him.
Screw that guy.
Screw that guy. Oh my God. Okay. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.